So just first things first, we're going to start with introductions to our speakers. We're going to go straight into the discussion, and we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we go along, drop them down in the chat, and we will address them at the end of the session. So without further ado, I would also like to thank our partner. So some of you that will be joining us might be joining us from Businesscom Africa's contact. And just to give them a shout out, Businesscom Africa offers Google Workspace, Copper CRM, Chromebooks, and Google Training. And they are our service provider for Google. So if you are interested in moving your business to Google, please give them a contact. You can just Google them, Businesscom Africa, and they would set you up very nicely on Google. So big shout out to them. And now to the most important part, introducing our speakers. So we have Heath, Dhana, the Managing Director of Ubuntu Hospitality, joining us today. And we have Matt Lambert from Summit, the Managing Director of Summit. And Matt is expert in training. So I'm going to ask Heath to start by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about Ubuntu, followed by Matt. Go ahead.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, you got a bit of feedback there.
Sorry.
Thank you, Clark. Okay, so lovely to be with all of you this morning. Hospitality professional, 35 years. I've been in the industry. A career that saw my first management position in the Mount Royal Hotel, Marble Arch in London, 700 bedrooms, and that then crisscrossed Africa as I've worked in many countries on the continent. More recently in East Africa, where I came up with the concept in 2019 to form a hospitality company called Ubuntu. Most people on the continent know Ubuntu, but basically it talks about the recognition that I am because you are. A person is a person only through other people. Linked to that linked to Ubuntu, we also often talk about going together in Africa, with that famous saying about if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. So Ubuntu was launched, as I said, in 2019. And this was obviously ahead of COVID, and very quickly through our relationship with Summit, I linked up with them and decided that we wanted to create a platform for people to engage, to reskill in hospitality, but to reskill in a way that's agile, because often, the costs of just education, etc., in hospitality are so expensive, and so we've created this platform now and done a JV with Summit, and I'm sure Matt will take us through what Summit does, and then I could possibly come in at the end to just explain how you can engage with us. Thank you, Clark.
So, fabulous, Matt. Over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Clark. No, don't stress. Thanks, Heath. What a beautiful introduction into Ubuntu, and just the concept of Ubuntu and how that's really. I'll speak very briefly about myself and speak more about the organization and our partnership. But you speak about that concept of Ubuntu, and that just personally for me is really what led me into the education space. And what I mean by that is particularly in the continent of Africa, education is our mechanism to transform the continent. And I came from a very strange background in pharmaceuticals, so some senior positions in pharmaceuticals, and the passion for education was so great that I decided to jump ship, and to our time has grown and extended, but jumped into the International Hotel School, which perhaps many of your viewers and or listeners may be familiar with, and the International Hotels and Invictus Education Group, which is a holding company, and the holding company have the International Hotel School, as well as some business things. So really, it's kind of because there's obviously insights that I can bring in corporate space that we've really seen and really relate to the theme that we're chatting about today. But I think I'm speaking in terms of space and summit. We've got a hotel, very strong school space and international schools, and I'd say beyond partnership. I mean, strong off through us some fantastic certifications and training, online training programs, and also face-to-face programs, which better out in having one of those qualifications. So, yeah. A little bit around I'll say I see the training environment, how that's changed in the digital space, but also having implemented a host of digital transformations in the hospitality minds. Some of there that So thank you very much. Thanks for the talk.
Thanks, Matt. Heath, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think that's good for now. There was obviously a little bit of connectivity problems listening to Matt, or was that just on my side?
I think that might just be on your side.
Okay.
It's clear from our end.
Great. Good. No, nothing else I can pick up.
Okay, fabulous. Great. Okay, so to quickly introduce myself, my name is Clark and I'm part of marketing at Ubuntu Hospitality. And I'm going to be moderating the discussion between Matt and Heath. Before we go straight into it, you guys know how this works. Mute yourselves throughout the discussion, pop your questions into the chat, turn your video on if you have connectivity to do so, because we'd love to know who's joining us. And we'll have a short Q&A session at the end where we'll address any of the questions you pop into the chat. And without further ado, let's go straight into the discussion. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to pose questions to Matt and Heath and have them answer them as we go along. So the first question is, with COVID having accelerated the digital adoption era, combined with learner operating models, what skills and certifications will hospitality professionals need to thrive in the industry? I think Matt or Heath, either of you can tackle that question.
Heath, I think you're better suited for this one. You know more about the leaner operating models and what's happening in the industry, having sort of been on the coalface. So I'll let you tackle that one.
Thanks, Matt.
The difficult one.
Cheers. So I don't think there's an industry in the world that can claim to be more severely affected by the pandemic than hospitality. And it doesn't matter whether you're a huge branded hotel, international hotel group, or a small, intimate little camp somewhere. It's been the most leveling experience, and everybody is at ground zero. I think we're all aware that many people, and often up to 50% of staffs were made redundant, had to go and fend for themselves. And of those that remained, there was loss of income, ranging from, anything from 30 to 70%. And so I do not think there's one person in leadership in hospitality or one company that has not been, fully engaged in just remodeling the entire process of how we do things. I think for the longest time, and speaking kind of openly about Africa, for the longest time, hospitality salaries have not been very high, and so the growth of people has not been onerous for businesses, and so, to be honest, we've carried much higher staffing numbers than we've ever carried before, and it never was an issue for businesses. And then comes COVID, and you re-look at all of that, and so there's big conversations around how do we become more agile? How do we and I guess when you think of the high cost of labor in Europe and the West, they've been doing this for years. Labor is so expensive, so they've engaged directly with innovation to bring down the number of people that they have to employ, because labor is so expensive. So we still certainly don't pay salaries that are anywhere near competitive to that Western world, but the big staff numbers that we've carried are certainly not. We're not in a position to continue to carry those going forward, and so I think there's this hugest amount of time of re-looking at every single aspect, and then saying, where they've got these manual processes, how do we come up with innovations that allow us to do things smarter and to that are less labor intensive. So I know that certainly, sadly, as we cross into 2021, that recovery that we all hope for hasn't materialized yet, and we're still early in the year, but we all know that it's going to take us a while longer. A conversation with McKinsey's group of people based in Kenya made it very clear that recovery is more likely to be in 2023 before you reach the 2019 numbers of occupancies, etc. So I think that's what most people have kind of been rethinking and remodeling. How do we do this more, with more agility?
Thanks for that, Heath. So there's this idea of a revolution within the industry and something that might last longer past COVID. So something triggered by COVID that has introduced these models that are forcing hospitality industry businesses to kind of question what is absolutely necessary and how do we innovate beyond human capital. Matt, was there anything you wanted to add to this question?
Yeah, I think Heath, rightly tackles it. I think obviously different parts of Africa will probably come aboard a little bit soon, from the hospitality perspective. Obviously, being based in South Africa, the guy we're forecasting slightly sooner than those numbers. But the point simply being is that there's been a massive impact, and the business models have shifted. And part of that business model shift speaks to not only, and which kind of we'll chat about, I guess, soon, but not only the digital models, digital adoption, innovation, etc., trends, but also it comes down to if you've got sort of potentially less people operating, the same size hotel and or restaurant, etc., food services operations, there's going to be a need to multi-skill those individuals. So, that's going to become so critical. We've seen it in South African context. We do a lot of multi-skilling, as a very small and very relevant example, but is kind of, you look at your bartender waitron, And typically those are two different and separate positions. Now a lot of operations are cross-skilling their staff to operate in both. So, kind of the bar service is picking up, and on the floor, it's very sort of light. One of the waitron quickly converts to a bar service operator. And so, that would typically, and that's sort of, I guess, a simple example of that, but we're seeing even in higher up in different positions where that switch is come from F&B into housekeeping, kind of that flex, if you want to call it, approach. So, to ensure that people, both in the individual capacity, but when we're thinking about upskilling staff, that we think of it in that manner combined with these innovations that are taking place.
Interesting. So not only is there this innovation in terms of how the model sits, but there's also a need for individuals to step up, to multi-skill, to acquire skills in different departments and different areas so that they become an asset to this new lean business model. Heath, would you say that's true? And what would you, from your experience on a practical level, expect from a hospitality professional when hiring them in terms of this new lean model? What can they do to prepare for such a model?
Thanks, Clark. So again, just picking up from what Matt was saying, the company I was with in East Africa, when we reopened some of our operations, we opened with the skeleton staff, and I think the multi-skilling could never have been more relevant. You're back to days where managers were working in the restaurant, clearing plates to just support the serving staff. Exactly what Matt was saying. You show up in one department and assist with breakfast, and then you could be working somewhere else at lunch, and maybe again somewhere else in the evening. So the call to action for me is, how ready are we for this kind of approach, for working much more, so the level of productivity is expected for these big hospitality businesses, particularly the big brands, for them to be able to reopen and get going again. There's going to be this need for upskilling of our skills. So, if I'm working in housekeeping in the morning, but I have no skills in, how do I do that? How do I, get those skills and become, more relevant? The thought about, when things are murky, I always liken it to a fish tank. If there's a fish tank with murky water, and you want to be the brightest that you can be in those murky waters, so you get picked ahead of anyone else. And so it's there cannot be a more relevant time to reinvest in yourself in hospitality. At my ripe old age of 55, I'm bang in the middle of an MBA with Africa Leadership University, and all being well, I'll graduate in July. So I think that just because I needed to tool up, there wasn't enough in my experience over the years to catapult me to the next thing I needed to do.
Amazing. So there's this idea of needing to reinvest in oneself regardless of your level of seniority or your position, but trying to make yourself an asset and make yourself stand out, particularly in times like these. Matt, was there something you wanted to add?
No, I think Heath nailed it.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to move on to the next question, and this I'm going to direct to Matt. What digital trends can we expect to impact the African hospitality space in the next 10 years?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm a terrible forecaster. So 10 years, it might be 20 years. I'm not sure in terms of how quick elements adapt and we kind of bring it into our space. But, having been pushing this kind of boundary of whether you call it technological innovation or digital adoption, whatever term you may use, is, one thing I do see is that there's these core trends that are definitely evident, and we kind of are already in our space, yet we don't really realize them. So I'll really probably talk to those and how I've seen them come into the hospitality environment already, even in a personal experience. And unfortunately, it is very boring and very old, talking to the fourth industrial revolution. But I think it just gives a little bit of context. So it's quite a big buzzword people use, and a lot of people talk about it. So I'm not going to harp on about it. But I think just to set the scene, is just to kind of, I love history. So it's always good to start with what's happened in the past, because the past often gives some clues to what will happen in the future. And you look over the different revolutions, your first industrial revolution, which is mechanization, and your second one, kind of thinking of, the automobile, Henry Ford, whatever color you can have it, but it must be black, that kind of everyone making widgets automated line. And the third one kind of works towards the if you would like to call it, the knowledge worker, and computation and automation. And and then you have what many people, what has been deemed since about 2016 by Klaus Schwab is the of the World Economic Forum, but is the fourth industrial revolution. And I'll give a little bit of context just now as what separates the fourth from the third. The big one, and some of the themes and trends I'll speak to, is really kind of the technological aspects. So, almost this merging of man and machine. If you look at the artificial intelligence side of things, and artificial intelligence has many layers to it, but broadly artificial intelligence, you look at 3D printing, kind of the specialization of being able to produce certain parts, specific parts for specific bespoke needs. There's also obviously the kind of the buzzword of big data, i.e., just the collection of vast quantities of data, and then you overlay it with the ability to analyze and draw out of it. And then, the two other elements to the fourth industrial revolution is really this IoT, or the Internet of Things, but essentially connectivity between everything, your bloody vacuum cleaner and your lights and your, as small examples. And I'll touch on a kind of a very interesting one I'm sure many of you probably have on you, but is some sort of device, monitoring device that in our case is many health or fitness monitoring devices. But the other big aspect of the fourth industrial revolution is this ability to almost monitor everything, whether it be on a human or within a building or facilities operational site, and having mechanisms to do that. And then you combine that with the Internet of Things, and you've got this, like I said, this ubiquitous network of information flowing that can be capitalized on. So, with looking at what separates kind of the fourth from the third, because computation and automation, how is that so different from kind of this fourth industrial revolution of man and machines? And just out of interest, and after the presentation can share kind of some nice graphics relating to this if you ever want to use it. But out of interest, if you look at how long it took for certain technologies to reach 100 million users worldwide, and why that kind of information is relevant in separating the fourth from the third, is that the fourth is just at a rate of change that is extremely rapid, way more rapid than all of the other revolutions that have taken place before it. So as an example, the telephone took almost 60 or 80 years to reach 100 million users. To give some other context, the mobile phone, would you believe it, was launched, yes, in 1979. and kind of took around 20 years to reach 100 million users. Then if you look at something like the internet, took just over 9 years to reach 100 million users. And then my personal favorite, not that I played a lot of it, but just as a real interesting example, 2012, good old Candy Crush is launched, and it takes 3 months to reach 100 million users. So, really what separates the fourth from the third is just this rapid rate of change and pace. And I guess it relates to kind of our first question, saying that in order to be able to keep up with that rapid rate of change, you need to be sort of, you yourself and a business needs to be continuously learning. Then going to kind of just the trends and touching on some of the, because like a terrible forecaster, but touching on some of the larger ones. So at least I'll be in the ballpark and get it right. The time frame might be a bit out, but looking at those areas that I spoke about within the fourth industrial revolution, kind of the major categories. One that is definitely going to really come into the hospitality space quite aggressive is elements of artificial intelligence. And there's a whole lot of aspects of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, etc. And I'm not going to go through the definitions of each, but just to give some real life context, which is coming in. I mean, I'm sure many of you know, but Marriott and Hilton, if you look at the AI and the robotic space of things, have started to launch robotic concierges. So, and that also falls into a big trend in that space of natural language processing. So where you'll have a robotic concierge who has the ability to, literally a little robot, who has the ability to not only, kind of supply information around different, restaurant services, etc., whatever what may be required, but also have the ability to do it in multiple languages. So, I mean, that's already in play. There's still a lot of work behind it that needs to occur, but it's definitely something that I would see in certain segments. One obvious area is on the concierge side of things, just because, often the value of a concierge is the wealth of knowledge that they have. So, what might be applicable is what I've seen actually in Beijing is you have this robotic concierge, but interestingly enough, there's the supporting services to those concierge, i.e. tour operators, etc., have now expanded, and they're humans. So that's quite a nice kind of partnership, a trade-off. And then the other one is really, what I've seen is on the machine learning side of things and the artificial intelligence side. So a small real example is collection of data in the hotel. So whereas, for example, you go to the bar, if you're like me, you grab your Castle Light draft, and I'm a creature of habit, every time 7 o'clock in the evening, go to the bar and have a Castle Light draft. In the morning, I eat my eggs and bacon, and it's kind of relatively consistent. And so collecting that information during your stay, you can start to anticipate what that customer is going to order. And for example, I've been in Austin, where literally because of my my habitualness of how I imbibe on my drinks or eat my food is when I sat down at the bar, there's almost a touch plate at the start of the bar saying, would you like your normal order of a Castle Light? If so, yeah, press yes, literally a tablet. And literally I could do that, or I could then engage with the bar service operator and order something different. But just those kind of, and it goes beyond that, and being able to, if you understand the eating habits of your staff in terms of your food preparation in the morning. So I know I spoke to the guys, is that, what they prepared on their buffet is a prediction of what the people have eaten over the last 3 days collectively. So you reduce food wastage, you reduce the volume of food that you push out, etc. So that's one that will definitely become more prevalent, I think, in the next sort of 10 years. And the other one is obviously a lot of you, I'm sure, have seen or been part of, is on the AI side of things, is optical OCR, so basically optical recognition or vision recognition processing, so which helps a lot in self check-ins. So often when you check in, there's a requirement that you present your ID booklet and or passport. And then what happens, as you know, the front desk operator is then using that to verify that you are the person on your passport, and obviously using it for check-in details. So that has has become, that sort of self-check-in component has already become prevalent. The one Radisson in Cape Town has a fully self-check-in kind of kiosk element already in place. So that is definitely around the corner. And then the other one, so it's really AI I see in those four categories, machine learning, robotics, natural language processing, and the vision component being four key themes in the next 10 years in that space. And the other one really is this, like I said, this Internet of Things, this ubiquitous connectivity. And a sort of a more simple one is sensory component. So if any of you have gone to Dubai or ever seen the Burj Al Khalifa, you'll know it's one of the tallest buildings in the world. And as such, obviously deals with quite large issues when it comes to sort of wind shears, etc. And interesting, what happens there is that obviously as the wind picks up, not only do the hydraulics in the building stabilize, but in which you as a guest kind of don't really feel too much. But what does happen is your background ambience, there's like a low buzz in your room, followed with almost like a little bit of light music. It's kind of subliminal. You almost don't know it's there. But as the wind picks up, that volume of that increases to a level that you kind of don't really recognize too much, but it blocks out the noise of obviously the increased wind shear. So, I mean, that's just a small example, but that's how the sensoring component is just on the structural side of things. I've been in hotels where there's, which I don't know is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you feel about your privacy. But interesting enough, on the beds, there's been sensors on the bed. And so kind of almost like what I would imagine them to be wake up and lie down sensors. So, i.e. when I got up in the middle of the night to go to the loo or the toilets, the toilet light went on. And when I got in at night, all the lights dimmed, and then the TV had a little, like, it shut down, but it said, would you like to keep the TV on, yes or no, kind of thing. So, so it's these small things, but it's this interconnectedness of that really allows that, and really just makes you kind of, some of it is quite gimmicky at the moment, but makes the guest experience a lot better. And then so really it's those two kind of key elements of, if you look at the fourth industrial revolution, that I think will be prevalent in Africa in the next sort of 10 years or so. And within those examples that are highlighted are the most practical ways in which we're going to see this technology used within the next 10 years. I mean, I think, I've spoken a lot, but just as I'm speaking about these questions, I kind of maybe pushing it back to the hospitality expert in Heath and saying, do you think, with all this technology coming into play, that we might be moving away from the human aspect of hospitality, Heath?
Wow, Matt, for a bush boy like me, listening to all these innovations just is absolutely mind-boggling, it makes me think about exactly what you've kind of led me into. It's something that I again in my last position that we kind of honed in on for management and staff is what we called intuitive hospitality. Someone has gone out on a game drive, they left in the morning really happy, they've come back and they don't seem to be the same, and that we ought to be able to pick up on that. We ought to be able to, something's gone wrong, or your first night at Sundowners, they were really engaging, and the second night, catching it in time has always allowed us to be able to rectify it. There's nothing worse than getting that information when the guest is checked out and you can do nothing about it. So We talked a lot about this intuition that you must have. I always relate to going into a typical hotel, and the manager walks into the restaurant and with his hands behind his back, and he looks at all the tables, and everyone knows the manager's walked into the restaurant and everything's okay, and leaves out, and there's me trying to raise my hand. I've got a problem, and no one's really seeing. There's that intuition needs to be developed in people. And so obviously with smaller intimate camps, and you're having closer conversations, you ought to be able to pick up on that, and even if it's a private conversation, or go and talk to the guide, or go, what's gone wrong with the guest. All seemed well, and once you establish that, most of the time it could be something small that you could absolutely attend to. So I pushing back a little bit, as as good as AI is, and as good as all of that, and as cool as some of the stuff is, I can't imagine that they can totally replace the human element. And particularly if I think about the continent, if you look at the feedback that international tourists have, the one overarching thing that they will say when in any feedback was those warm, bright, smiling faces, of the continent. The people of Africa, really, you arrive as a guest, and and when you check out, you feel as friends. The number of tourists that interact back home, back with staff, and so on and so forth, is just incredible. And most people, if they had to pick one thing, they would probably, talk about those amazing smiling faces. So it's quite interesting as we talk about reskilling and working with fewer staff and looking at productivity, and how do we still keep this element of hospitality alive and burning. And as ever, I think South Africa will always be at the cutting edge of what's going on in the Western world. So interesting to hear about being able to, almost like a baggage drop check-in at an airport, but be able to just get yourself in, and of course hell of a relevant in the context of a business hotel. The most precious thing we all have is our time, and clearly the amount of time it's going to take you to check in and to do all these things is eating into your time, and realizing that a busy a businessman that has a lot to get through and just needs to get in. But on the flip side of that, I can't imagine, and there's a few safari friends on the call here. I can't imagine a briefing arriving in a luxury safari lodge or camp being done by AI, and executing that really, really well. I think it would be really bizarre in that space, but I'd like to think that there's always going to be that that space for that human interaction. There's Daniela, a good friend of mine, on the call today. We're chatting a little bit about the failing of some of the shared living models that that have been kind of launched with multi-use facilities that have not really worked so well. And we've got big hotels right now with some of them, huge conferencing and conference facilities. And I don't know if anyone really knows the right answer. I keep talking to people about, will big conferencing and big meetings and whatever come back? And, most hoteliers will say, yeah, of course they will. People just love that interaction. But for the longest time now, we've been able, here we are on a call now from all different places, and we didn't need to spend huge amounts of money to come to a meeting. So will they come back? I don't really know. But what do you do with all these big spaces in hotels? And we were talking last night about, a hotel is well positioned for these coexisting platforms that you've got everything around you already, and now you've got excess space. Is it something we could be engaging with to just repurpose some of that space? So I think certainly there's as you. Some of you certainly haven't had the experiences that Matt's had with these wide travels, but certainly that intuitiveness and guests wanting to just cut through. You often have this problem in a hotel. You're at the swimming pool, there isn't a waiter. Now you got to get up and you got to go and pull. But if there was a device there, you could order your drink, or you could hail someone and they could come. And you also get that awkwardness where a waiter is like hovering, and people have got their clothes off, they're in their swimming gear, and so it also feels a bit strange. And there's certainly those kind of interactions where you just think, there's got to be and there's plenty smart ways of doing it. I think.
I think. Yeah, I was going to say, Heath, I think I'm glad that you pushed back, because that's kind of the reaction that I was hoping for. Because in my what I've when I've spoken to, yes, definitely different environments will have a different need for different types or different arrays of technologies and where they fit in. But what has been overarching, in respect of all the people that I've engaged with who have had or do have this technology in place, or whatever the case be, they're saying what now becomes so critical, and it is one of the most critical aspects, is you spoke, and I loved how you coined it, that intuitivity, and that basically that service, kind of, we bring it down at one base level, is that incredible service that humanness that you actually experience where in whatever hospitality setting you're in, becomes that much more critical. Because as an example, let's use self-check-in. If self-check-in now becomes a commodity type of component, then, and everyone's eventually got it, it doesn't become a differentiator. So what is the differentiator? Well, the differentiator is your experience that you have there, the engagement that you have with people, the staff in the hotel, and or hospitality setting. So that becomes so critical. So it's what I see becoming so important is that human aspect is actually going to become way more important. There's going to be some commodity elements that this technology brings in, and it's about that human aspect combined with, let's say, that information that this technology kind of elements are feeding to you. How do you bring that together? But the most important thing is your differentiator is going to be that intuitiveness in respect of that service that you're getting, etc. So for me, I think actually it's if you move away from that human aspect, you'll actually be doing yourself a disservice, and you'll be playing in commodity-based sort of arena in the hospitality space. So that for me is really where I personally feel that human aspect becomes more important versus less important.
Amazing! What an incredible discussion, and very much true. I mean, there's so many benefits coming from the digital revolution that's coming our way, in terms of how to tailor customer experience and how to perfect the experience of the customer, and how to be more efficient as a business. But in that regard, there's also this idea of the human touch, the human element, and connector. And when you're looking at places like Asia, where in China and Japan, they already have robotics and AI in restaurants, to engage with customers, so they don't really need humans. But now you have this new business of people, paying waiters to sit down to talk to them because there's a lack of human connection. So that's a really insightful discussion.
Yeah, I think and I know I'm mindful of time, but I think the important thing is, you think about it logically. If I'm going to, and I've been in Toronto, I went into a sushi place, and it was the funniest thing in the world is that there was self-ordering. So self-ordering on the table, okay, cool, sat down, but there was waiters everywhere, or what I perceived to be waitrons. And I was like, I don't understand this business operating model. So I called over the manager and I said, hey, why? He said, do you know what happened? we had this self-ordering element, no waitrons, and people came, and the feedback was like there was no ambience. I'm coming to have a meal for an experience. Otherwise, I'll just order, in South Africa, I'll just order Mr. Delivery and have the meal delivered to my home, if I really want. But I'm going there to have an experience. And the ambience was lacking because that ambience is created by that engagement and interaction. So there's certain elements where the experience is what you're doing it for, i.e. going to a restaurant. You can make that same food at home, for the most part, unless it's a Michelin star or whatever, and maybe some of you are Michelin star chefs, but you're going for an experience, and that experience comes with human engagement and interaction. And even in business hotels, I feel that is a critical part of a business experience.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I know we're pretty much done with time, but there's something that to just leave everyone to think about. This debate that goes backwards and forwards about the death of the tour operator. With the changing face of the big international travelers, from the baby boomers now. Starting to bow out, and some of the millennials that want instant gratification. I don't want to go and have this long experience to finally put my safari together. I want to be able to almost put it into my shopping cart and go and pay, and I want to travel next week, and it should be possible because that's what I want to do. So that's an interesting kind of thought to kind of just close this on, as to and again, if you talk to big tour operating businesses, there's mixed feelings, as there is about conferencing. Will they still be relevant? Do they still need that human touch in that space or not? So yeah, that's another big one.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good time to kind of circle back and also, give you guys an opportunity to talk about a little bit about Ubuntu and Summit and the opportunity at hand. And briefly, each of you, how is technology assisting with training when it comes to, the time that we're in? Between COVID.
Yeah.
How are people reskilling?
We can break it down into maybe two parts. Is really the individual and the business, and kind of and really what we're seeing is on the individual side of things is often in the hospitality space, a lot of the education has limited avails come from the ability in terms of what training that you're going to be reskilling yourself on, because it was pretty much directed either by the hotel or the hospitality operation, and or kind of what is available to them to be able to train, i.e. what training providers are in the area, etc., etc. So, with the individual, what we've seen is they've been able to take control of their own. They've had to take control of their own learning because they've realized, because of this, the challenge in the hospitality industry, there was not that ability for many hotel chains to train. So we see it in the certifications, the AHLEI certifications, which have just boomed in terms of people being able to do them online. And, that's been quite a revelation for a lot of individuals, because now I'm not sort of limited towards very traditional areas of upskilling. Now I can obviously, go into a different area, i.e. revenue management, resort management, which typically might not have been on the cards in the hospitality operation that we're on. So the individual has awoken to this need to upskill themselves, and also understood that by doing so, they can broaden the scope of what can be learned, because they're not narrowed to either a geography or what is available and or what the hotel operations is sort of pushing out. And then secondly, just to wrap up on the business side of things, is what we've actually found is we worked a lot over the last year and a half, bringing in digital learning systems, etc., into hospitality operations and broader. But it's what we've seen is that there's a need to be more concise with the information that we're pushing out there, and better at getting it across. kind of the old-fashioned days. Not so old-fashioned, but how do you learn? Well, you kind of, okay, go meet Jim or John or whoever over there, and he'll run you through, or she will run you through the SOPs. And what happens is you get run through their version of the standard operating procedures, which is not quite standard operating procedures. And so what we're seeing is that now that information is kind of condensed, concise from one source, and also because a lot of mobile learning has been brought into this space, is that the adaptability of the staff and the turnaround time on, like, for example, a new product, like you introduce a new type of cappuccino or something like that. The turnaround staff and being able to run that or put that into the operation at a high quality level has rapidly increased, where typically it might have taken us 2 months. We can get it done in a week. So that's really what we've seen at the individual and the business level. And perhaps maybe now, I guess, Clark, not to take on your role, but maybe I've talked too much, a good time to open up for any questions that have come through on the chat.
Okay, so we have a question from Danielle. Do you think that digital learning affects the quality of delivery in hospitality education?
So I think I'd be remiss to say no, it doesn't. And I guess the caveat there is to a point, and depending on what type of skill set that you're bringing to the table. And what I mean by that, let's take a real practical example. Revenue management, okay, and obviously touch on it. That's something that from a pure digital learning environment, if it was done purely digitally, is not going to affect the quality of how you are able to enact that skill set, because it's, it doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of, when I say practical, I mean tactile interventions. And whereas you look at a barista, it's very difficult for a barista to, not impossible, because a lot of people learn different skill sets off YouTube, but it's quite difficult for that type of quality of delivery to be the same as your revenue management in sort of a purely online environment. So, it really depends on the skill set, I think, is one caveat. But second to that, Danielle, is that what we do find is that you can do a blended mode, where a lot of the theoretical components of barista beans, the what are different roasting techniques, which they might not necessarily, they would never really be roasting perhaps, but to have that knowledge of the roasting techniques, their service, their kind of what they can speak to their guest about, makes that experience that much more enjoyable. That's something that can be done in a blended type of approach, but how to actually practically do it, that needs to be physical. So, so I think it depends, I guess, is the difficult answer, and there's no one size fits all solution, but definitely it's to tackle the relevant skill sets and find out how you can either have that in an online environment or blended environment, and or good old face to face.
Absolutely. Is there anything you wanted to add, Heath, to that comment?
Yeah, so I mean, just a couple of quick things. Matt talked about SOPs and onboarding people, and I often call it the bad photocopy. A copy of a copy of a copy, and then people can't even read it, and so its relevance is so poor. And so having using tech in that space is really helpful. If you talk to hotels, revenue management is a skill set that's never been taught in hotel schools, but it's probably one of the most important and significant skills that big hotels need, is someone that's looking at it, because that's what actually impacts on the bottom line effectively. So that's absolutely on the button in terms of what do we now need, as opposed to, well, we've always done a diploma must have these subjects, and without them you're not going to get a diploma, but they're not relevant. I employ you and you don't have those skill sets that would absolutely are relevant right now and will make impact in the business.
Fabulous. So there's another question that popped in. So is that what sets apart your training from that of Lobster Inc.? What are the other UVPS that you put ahead of the game, so to speak? That's from Dhana.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Obviously, Lobster, for just a brief for Lobster Inc. kind of training, if people are unfamiliar with it, a large part of that training is delivered to some form of, it's now online, but traditionally delivered to some form of almost like a call it a multi-choice, almost or decoder type of box, and the training enacted on a screen, and you get learners in theory and get them to watch that. And I think the content, I've got to give them kudos. Their content is really strong, is really great, and very humorous, and I really love it. One of my best friends is one of the directors there, so I can't say too many bad things about it. I can say lots of bad things about him, but I think but what are the USPs, I guess, or unique value proposition components of what we're doing? And I think probably one of the critical elements of that is a lot of the lobster-based training has typically been sort of a one-to-many. So, getting many people in one room watching a device, which has its challenges, and understanding who's actually participating, who's engaging. That's the one side of things, where ours, if you're doing that, is a one-to-one approach. You've got tutorials, you've got sessions, and you've got someone holding you accountable. So that's probably one of the big points. And the other obviously big point is, because there's a certification aspect, and we spoke about the HLI certifications running through Ubuntu, it's that becomes quite critical. It becomes quite critical in two elements. One is the actual completion rate of learners is quite incredible when there's a certification, particularly an international certification at play. And then secondly is, with a certification and the mechanisms and means to assess in respect of the certification, that within your organization, if that person has obtained that certification, that there is a baseline of what they need to know or adhere to be able to obtain that certification. So you're always getting that baseline. You may be getting better than the baseline because they're a great learner or whatever the case would be, but there's a baseline. And I think for me that's the challenge in respect of Lobster Inc., because their baseline has firstly, they don't essentially have certifications, and their sort of internal certifications baseline is set on their experiences versus an association that's been around in the restaurant game and hotel game for almost 95 years. So that's a wealth of experience that's difficult to replicate in 7-8 years or 10 years that Lobster Inc.'s been around.
Good. Well, I think well put, Matt. Likewise, very good friends. Love the product. Really innovative. Engaged with it twice in the very beginning, and again being in East Africa. And the big problem, obviously, the certification. Can I take the certificate anywhere? And who knows about it? Doesn't help. And then because it was almost, even though the idea was to get people around in a room watching it, places are often so busy that there isn't the time to do that as a group, particularly smaller properties, etc. So it's kind of that you find time on your own as the learner to go and do this. And there's, always superstars, and then there's everybody else. And so the impact for the business was not as great as we would have hoped it would have been. So the level of engagement, and then you're starting to put pressure on managers to say you need to find more time. But ultimately, the individual needs to, be the one that has the appetite to drive that. And again, just one more thing about America Hotel and Lodging Educational Institute is that international certification. It is kind of the gold standard internationally. And there's many more, of course, there's Swiss qualifications, etc. But for Africa, we all know it well. I tackled it later in life, where I was able to do a CHA, a Certified Hotel Administrator, which is kind of designed for people that have done the time in the industry, but didn't get the diploma originally, want to just upskill and do something relevant. And they can engage, provided that they've got that, that background. So I think those are really, really powerful reasons for engaging with us.
Thanks so much for that. And now, just being conscious of time, I'm going to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Heath. Some incredible insights were discussed here today, and definitely something that we can carry forth as we move forward. Just as a quick call to action, if you're interested in reskilling or upskilling, we have courses available, online access. Please email us at info@ubuntuhospitality.com. I will send a thank you email to all of you for joining us with information that will direct you to our website, and you can view potential courses that you might be interested in. Thank you to all the hospitality professionals that have joined us here today. Fabulous group in attendance, and we look forward to having you in more Ubuntu and Summit events. Matt and Heath, if you'd like to say thank you.
No, just thank you very much. It's been a great experience and awesome.
Just finishing up, yeah. Okay, I'm joining now.